Dakin, and this is the Successful Funding Show. We are live on LinkedIn, and I have with me as my guest this morning Steve Shaff. We were intended to be on the show last week, but I was in California, apparently in an internet zone where large bandwidth was not possible. So we're redoing it today, and I'm happy to get into today's topic, which is community engagement. And as always, everything on this show is about funding. So whether it's in the backdrop, forefront, to the side, upside down, everything impacts the ability of small businesses and community projects to obtain funding. And we're going to have a conversation. And I'm so looking forward to it today. So, Steve, please introduce yourself, your company, your history. Throw in anything you think might be of value to our audience. And before I turn it loose to Steve, I want to remind our audience today that please chat in the comments. Let us know what you're doing, why you're here, what questions you have. Throw things on the table for us to talk about because this is a live interactive experience and we really appreciate your participation. So, with that, Steve, take it away.
All right, Carl, how much time do we have this morning? Or should I use the short version of why we've crossed paths and why we're having this conversation? But seriously, my name is Steve Shaff. I'm the founder of Community Vision Solutions, which is a benefit corporate LLC with a real mission to initiate, facilitate, and agitate for the common good. Now, when I throw that line out there, I get a lot of chuckles like, oh, okay, where does that come from? But I'll explain to you a little bit more about it being more than just a nice little jingle. I came down to DC. I originally grew up outside of Philadelphia. Came down to DC as a grad student. I was accepted into the PhD program at GW. I wanted to study applied social psychology because I have this real strong interest in why societies do really bad things over and over and over, driven by it's the handful of, shall we say, strong men or personality types that we might be experiencing in today's world. But in any case, my goal was to get a PhD and then really actively go into the communities that I was very familiar with to really help change things. So all this to say is I loved academia, but after about a year and a half or so here in DC, I accidentally got into a real estate deal where I learned that you can buy real estate without a job and without money. Those those tricks of the trade were true. So I accidentally got into a deal. And then after a successful purchase of a property, I decided as much as I loved grad school, I want to take a little time off because even with a PhD, I didn't think I'd make a good, strong living with a social justice activist background. So I decided, all right, let me take a little bit of time. Let's buy a little bit of real estate with my newfounded expertise. And then you go back to school. What I found was you could really rebuild communities and make a lot of money. So after about a year of taking a leave of absence, I realized I was pretty good at it. Plus, the DC market was very strong at the time. So my goal was then to kind of convert into a social enterprise activist that had business sense to go out and change communities. So I had been living and working in underserved communities back in Philly when I was a kid. We called them ghettos. I worked for my uncle's ice cream store from the age of all throughout high school. And I saw a neighborhood literally transform from a strong, healthy white Irish neighborhood into a slum in 4 years. It was just amazing. So I was familiar with being kind of a white kid in these neighborhoods. So anyway, as I started transferring to a different capacity, I decided that rebuilding underserved communities is a huge profitable way to raise capital. So I started out as affordable housing developer. I'd introduced myself as affordable housing developer with a nonprofit mission. Confused everyone, including my nonprofit allies I wanted to work with. A lot of skepticism. Developers don't come into communities and speak that way. The concept was let's go in and do responsible redevelopment in communities that absolutely no resources, capital, or capacity, and whose front lines for changing or preserving communities were underserved or undercapitalized churches, community development corporations, and so on, et cetera. So the concept was, let's do some real estate, let's raise money, and then recycle that money into uh, um, complementary social projects, which then, of course, helped our own investment activities. That was the concept. So I did that for about 20 some odd years. So I was also very involved as an activist, both a community activist and being in DC. I would literally, get done with my work in our neighborhoods that were very underserved, shall we say, and then go up to the Capitol Hill and get involved with my more national networks. So I had this interesting depth of experience deep within the communities that we were serving, as well as knowing how to work the rules of the inside the Beltway, Capitol Hill kind of thing. The idea then was to really raise the capital, rebuild communities, and really partner up with community stakeholders to preserve communities before gentrifiers or market forces came in. Now, DC is sort of like San Francisco. Over 20 or 30 or 40 years, we absolutely almost entirely gentrified. You just can't find affordable housing here. So the bottom line here was, before the real estate crash, when I was beginning to show my concept that you can go in, buy slumlord housing and reconvert it and create home ownership with a high degree of green components and so on, et cetera, and organize the community at the same time with real respect and dignity to the community holders or residents, you could literally change some of the most dramatically devastated communities and underserved communities. So my concept was always that the paradigm for improving our communities was always been dysfunctional and won't work. And it still doesn't work. We're still using the same paradigm. The goal was to go in and literally partner up with community stakeholders, bring the capital that they may not have had, bring the capacity, the experts that were willing to come in and provide the expertise, but weren't going to eat anyone's lunch because they wanted to see communities change as well, and bring in all the other coalition partners and other sectors that need to come together. Community arts, for example, not just job creation, but job or Black entrepreneurship opportunities. Bring all those things together. So after quite a bit of time of doing that, I came up with it was basically the Community Alliance Project, which is what the Community Vision Solutions is that's our signature initiative. And the goal there is to literally partner up with the right community partners, whether it's a nonprofit, small business, a faith-based organization that doesn't have the wherewithal, the credentials, or the expertise that we have, and partner up with them and bring and aggregate all sorts of capital sources. By the way, capital is the key between all these sectors that was common. So everything we were doing required capital, whether it's supporting small businesses, affordable housing, community centers, things like that. So, of course, capital is the primary thing, and of course still is. So all that to say is, after all these years, after the real estate to housing market blew up here, that this is what I created. And of course, the goal here is to work with collaborators, coalition partners, people who could do things and are smarter than I am, bring it together, but create authentic relationships within the community. And you can do that. And you can find that the community has leaders if they're empowered with some resources that we could usually bring to the table better than the community can. Then you can really start changing things. And then there's also an activist side of things too. If we're here helping rebuild your community, then let's make sure you get your neighbors, your residents, your peers, your brothers, your sisters, your grandmother to go out there and vote, because guess what? You could start electing, when you start electing your own politicians, all of a sudden you may have more hope, because the politicians that are, shall we say, dominating the political world are, raising more money than we can in the community. So the bottom line here is, you need to merge all these sectors together. It's a pretty complicated thing. At the same time, it's pretty simple. So all this to say is, the big priority is, how can we find that capital that's adroit, patient, and practical enough to come in and invest in projects that are worth doing because market forces are coming in here first and blowing everyone out because they can find a good deal, close on it within 2 months or so after the title's clear, and get going. Nonprofits, the churches and whatnot, take a couple years or more to try to put a stack together or the right project together to do a deal. That's why we just don't have a chance against market forces. So, question is, how about we start using market forces and adding the strength and the fabric of a community to the mix, and that's how we can create change. And by the way, my last point here is, and again, I could talk about this for the next couple of hours, is this model we're creating here is best served in underserved communities. And if America has a surplus of resources, it's underserved communities. So the idea here is, can we create a model, not one size fits all, but a model that can be applied to communities that really want to empower themselves and have the right leadership and the right resources on or components on the ground for us to come in and partner with them. And then from our perspective, the best partner to have for us to have in a real estate or business development or other community investment project would be people who are from the community, that know that community very well, and will work harder to make that investment work for the community much longer than the paradigm we have now. So that's a little bit of where I'm
Just
from.
just a little bit. Yeah, typically we try to cover one or two concepts, on a full hour show. And I think you got up past 20 and I lost count somewhere along the way. But you're pointing out a number of, I think, common elements that we'll try to dive into here before today's show is over. But before we do that, I'm going to reach out to our audience. Don Cohen is here with us this morning. Don is my mentor and a friend who's helping me and other people learn to use LinkedIn Live like this program and my newsletter to get the word out or to share information. And this is all part about my effort to build my own community. And when I define community in this case, I'm not limiting it to a geographic area. It's more of a sense of affinity or common spirit that I have with Steve and a number of other people where we're like, money can do so much good if it's put in the right place at the right time with the right other ingredients. And maybe we'll throw in a baking time as well. But we are trying to create a recipe for success, and we'll talk about that in more detail. But I have found that as I move forward, that it's important for me to put myself out there in the public where all my hopefully good thoughts are not contained just between my ears, but get out there and share those with other people so that we can get feedback from our audience, feedback from the larger community, from the 1 billion people who are using LinkedIn as a platform for gathering and sharing information. And all this just contributes to a richer capability of getting something done. Um, Steve, you used the term activist, and I think you were using it in the vernacular of getting somebody elected. I also like to refer to people I work with as action figures. So maybe we're going over into movie parlance, but I like to work with people to get stuff done. Time is too short. There's too much work to be done. There's a great need out there. And I've found that one of the problems that we face generally, and particularly in local communities, is there's too many people talking over the top of the problem without getting their hands dirty or diving in. And it was interesting to hear you describing that balance between going out and trying to get people to rethink what they're doing, then going back into your community where the action truly happens. And so, Steve, tell us a little bit about how you go about trying to focus outside energy, or what we might call external resources, on a local community where most people go, it's not my backyard, I don't care.
Mhm. Well, and to your point earlier, and part of my whole career dilemma is I worked in so many different ways. It was such a big, broad picture. You literally had to put a map together. So what I was emphasizing is there's many sectors that need to come together to really create substantive change. But the one part that really ties over is capital, and we can speak the rest of this conversation about capital. But that's kind of the bottom line. But it's not just capital to do a deal; it's capital to make sure that it's invested in the right places and the right players are involved. So if we wanted to, buy a building that is going to be developed into high-rise exclusive condos in a community that really wants to preserve that arts organization that's been in that building. How do you do it with beyond just putting the deal together? You have to have community support. You have to make sure that the zoning and all these components would make sense to create this opportunity. So that being knowledgeable of the local community is very important to help mitigate risk. So, for example, I was working on a project a couple of years ago. It was an outstanding opportunity. Developers were literally walking the streets, just salivating over this. It wasn't on the market yet, and then the tenant, a arts organization, had a lease that had their first rights to buy. So the bottom line here is, if they couldn't exercise that first rights, this would have been a condo development. Bottom line was, this arts organization had enough wherewithal, but deep community support, so that if we had to go through a zoning change, which was key to the value and ultimate goal of that property, we knew that we can assemble a team on their behalf that would go through a zoning process and have the local political support to do it. So the point I'm making here is just not the financial numbers about whether a deal makes sense or not. It's these components that come together to create something that gives this local arts organization that had no resources and no business wherewithal at all to be able to secure a type of property that is now going to be 100-unit affordable housing, truly affordable housing, with an art center that's going to be state of the art and extra space for incubators. In other words, the whole campus there, instead of high rise for luxury condos. The point I'm making here is, if that group didn't discover me and the way I do business, they would have to move and probably would have had to shut down, even though they were a successful and powerful arts organization that really did well for children and culture and all that good stuff in a gentrifying neighborhood. So what I'm getting at here is, when they met me and I said, hey, I see opportunity here. Let's talk about putting together a joint venture. They just thought I was nuts. And then after a few weeks and a couple of people who they knew that had credibility, they realized, okay, this guy's not smoking whatever they're selling out in the corner, which in the neighborhood, that's kind of where this neighborhood was, despite its path of gentrification. The whole point here is, after looking at all this and putting these pieces together, we had a tremendous package that the landlord decided, okay, I'm just going to sell it to these guys, because the even market forces that can pay me us even more may not succeed, because, again, zoning in this case made this property so much value. And we didn't care about zoning because we knew we can get it through zoning, and a developer would not, because the neighborhood would have been absent. So the point here is, we had an advantage because we had information, knowledge, and a real connection to the community and support, which we knew would translate into building a capital stack. Now, the problem, though, was building the capital stack was still an arduous process. Even after we tied up the property, it took quite some time to bring in the right players to do that. And that's really where I think we want to be, in terms of finding capital sources that can come in, respect the community, but also leverage and take advantage of all these factors that will mitigate risk and create something that will be there not just for 30 or 40 years, but really transform that community, bring businesses, so on, et cetera. And then the businesses, they need financing too. So there's crowdfunding and all sorts of other mechanisms that, with our kind of expertise, we could bring to the table. Now, executing it, that's another thing. That's another conversation, probably another convening here. But so the point I'm making here is, when you can work with players, that have real anchors and advantages in communities, but don't have other parts, and we can help bring that to them, there's tremendous opportunity. And that's a niche that benefits the common good.
Yeah, so again, lots of things to unpack here and break down. For some of our listeners in the audience, I'm going to start with the concept of a capital stack, and then I'm going to go sideways on that to some of the issues that Steve's talking about. When you do a particular project or a small business are looking for funding, if you get funding from one source, then it's one source. But anytime you get funding from two or more sources, then it becomes a capital stack. And we use this term very carefully because what we've experienced is that very rarely will one type of money or one source of money satisfy all the needs of a particular business or community project. And so it's necessary to strategize in advance to understand, what kind of money, what is needed, whether it's short-term, long-term equity versus debt, whether it's high yield or low yield, all these different attributes of funding, and who has those and who's willing to put them into a specific thing. And you end up maybe looking at dozens of different types of capital and saying, in this particular situation, we're going to take one of these, two of those, a couple of these, and weave them together. And you kind of need to know all these in advance to know how they interact, how they fit, and how one will attract another. So it's kind of like a magnets bringing them together. So at that point, though, as Steve was pointing out, we then get into some other issues. We get into the issue of we need to be working with the community, not over the community or mandating, cramming down stuff to the community, because for this to truly work in a community, it needs to build wealth. It needs to help those members of the community, the residents, to improve their lives, improve their wealth status by working with this particular project that we're putting on the table. And if they don't know about it, if they're not engaged, if it looks like it's making somebody down the road money, they're not going to be involved, which kind of leads us to a second issue, which I think is important in that uh, we have to design stuff to be economically sustainable. And in shorthand, that means we have to make a profit. Um, there's a lot of projects out there that are doing good. I commend the people who are behind them, but they tend to become one and done projects where there's either elements that cannot be repeated or they're so unique that you can see them and applaud their efforts, but you say, I can't do this twice or 5 times or 20 times. There's no way to replicate this and scale it to the size of need that we have. And this ability to generate a profit has to be visible to everyone who's participating. Otherwise, the community is not building wealth. And when we need to go outside the community for any missing money because there may not be enough in the community, again, we have to look like an investment, a reasonable investment. It may not pay anything high at all. It may be marginal returns, but we have to have something for show and tell. And if we're not making a profit, we're not going to get the buy-in. If we don't have a local community behind it, participating and benefiting from this, then we're not going to get the buy-in from these people who are outside the community who may have they by definition have a much more limited benefit from the success of the project, so they have a less reason to put their money in a particular location. So this becomes an interesting design implementation thing for a capital stack that is going to engage the community to help and benefit them to make a profit and be strong enough in what it's doing that it can attract outside money into the community as well. So to create this combination that then is large enough, strong enough to do everything that we're talking about doing. So, and this is just one piece of what Steve and I are talking about. So, Um, Steve, as you see capital coming into the community, how do you see it being used? What would you be doing a little differently or a little better, however you want to spend that, to make the money work in a way that achieves all these things that I've just said?
Well, what's been interesting is over the last, I think, 5, maybe 10 years, there's been a lot more tools that are on the table. Some look good on paper and sound good, but are still relatively in its infancy, but still have great potential, like crowdfunding. I like crowdfunding. I think it makes sense. But the audience that's even aware that crowdfunding is an option is pretty small. So that's something we need to work on. And when you take that, really literally small investors from the community or even beyond, and match that with institutional organizations that really are wanting to invest in the community, but frankly have no connection to it. So donor advised funds that say, yeah, we need more housing, or we need to save or preserve more or build more Black businesses. We understand it, we get it. The pandemic, I think, woke up a lot of players. I don't know why it took so long, but the problem still remains. How does a DAF have any wherewithal to take their money, invest it in proper projects on the ground? And that's a real problem. So when we would approach, we like to approach DAFs and let them know that, hey, we have business savvy, we know how to do development, we know how tough it is, but collectively we have the community, we have all the support, so on, et cetera. Come in here, think with a different mentality, say 10 years, and we'll get you the returns you need, preferably lower than you would hope for, because all cost of funds certainly help. The point I'm making here is, if you're a conduit to real capital for projects that have a much stronger ability to result in both financial and social returns, then that's a real big opportunity. The problem, though, in my estimation, is DAS, who do they go for advice? Financial planners or advisors. Very few of them have set foot in the communities where we know where the opportunities are. So I think that's starting to open up a little bit. The foundations are becoming a little more entrepreneurial, all that. And so that's very optimistic. What I would like to do, and I think with some of the work that we're discussing, is how do we sit everyone down and start connecting the dots and saying, look, if you want to invest in 10, 15 million, whatever, to leverage this great project, well, let us help you lead to this great project, and it has all the components that any investor would want to get involved with. And that's an education, that's a consumer and investor kind of process. So a lot of moving parts there. But at the end of the day, if we can get this kind of alignment together with the understanding, we're not just asking for money and we're going to, hopefully invest it and it won't blow up. No, we want to be strategic. There are opportunities here. If there's not enough housing, then economics says, if supply and demand, there's real opportunity here. And by the way, we're going to be often in neighborhoods that ultimately will gentrify. Okay, maybe not all, or we'll be in rural areas that need economic activity and support. And this is, again, not just money you're throwing away. So anyway, the whole idea is bring all this expertise together, match it up with investors that never had this kind of connection or relationship, including foundations that give all their money away. Well, foundations, why don't you come in? And this is really important. Pre-development money has lack of pre-development money, and that's real high risk money, right? Has killed many, many, many opportunities. So a nonprofit, for example, that we're working with owns their own real estate. They're land rich, okay? And they want to tear down their aging buildings and build enough extra buildings to create a revenue flow from the extra space they could build. Plus, they could expand their own program, so on. The problem is, even though they're sitting on land that they own free and clear, they don't have the pre-development to pay, experts or consultants or advisors on how to put all this together. So therefore, they're floundering, hand to mouth kind of organization, despite the fact that they're in a prime neighborhood because they happen to survive the gentrification and they own land there. The whole point here is, without pre-development money, they're stuck. They're just going to have to meander along with what they're doing. So finding sources for that type of capital is really important. And then, of course, the other capital, the mezzanine capital, the patient capital, the capital that can be in a deal for 10 years. Because again, after 10 years in these communities, you're creating such strong market underpinnings. Your risk is pretty low after 10 years. But if you want to return in 24 months or 3 months, like a typical mezzanine financing, that just really jeopardizes and impacts the whole deal. So the question is, can we find a marketplace out there through a combination of crowdfunding, diversified community investment funds, and other creative but sensible ways to really kind of blend all this together? Then we'll be able to take advantage of much more opportunities. And one last point, a non-capital point, is you have to take into consider how much resources and human capital is burnt up when a nonprofit tries to purchase and develop a good project or business development in their neighborhoods. And it takes them several years, grant writing, this, that, and the other, and to get 95% there, and they can't get that last 5%. And after 2 or 3 years, everything falls apart. That is exhausting. You're the best and the brightest say, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of wondering whether we're going to get a paycheck or not. I'm tired of losing out to market forces. I'm out of here and I'm going to go into some other job. That is a huge cost that impacts us all. We want the best and brightest to be in these communities, to give this service, to create, again, opportunities that impact the entire community and create a sense of community and a whole bunch of other things that, like I said, have more than just a financial return, but a social return that benefits us all. A safer neighborhood is much cheaper and lower in taxes when you don't have to have, police presence 24/7. And I've worked in some pretty tough neighborhoods before that we've literally turned around. And I bet you the cost of security and police enforcement in these neighborhoods is very low compared to the way it was years ago before we got involved in these communities. A lot of intertwined parts here, Carl.
So, yeah, I'm not sure we're doing a good job of making this sound simpler. Because to some degree, to be fair, this is highly complex. You have so many different interests with different agendas, and in trying to, I will call, pull or extract the value of what other people have done in the past, what they've done successfully, and also learning our lessons from things that have not worked. We have seen that trying to do things maybe one piece at a time probably don't create that critical momentum, that critical mass. And they tend to have an ability to be more biased, or for somebody to influence them in the wrong direction, to pull them away from not only the goal for which the project was created, but it tends to work against this sense of community. So, yeah, I have also worked with a number of nonprofits whose heart was in the right place, but did not understand finance, who assumed that having your heart in the right place was all that was required to be successful. And without the expertise and without using a sustainable economic model, they ended up either not, as you described it, never getting to the end result, or even after building something out, found that it was planned or designed in a way that there wasn't enough money to continue it after it was achieved. And ultimately it failed. And um, you appreciate all the effort and energy that went into it, but at some point you're saying, I'm having a hard time watching this Thelma and Louise movie where they drive the car over the cliff time and time again, and don't get anywhere. Um,
And that's our paradigm that we've been using since, I don't know, before Reagan. And why do we keep working on that? Why is it taking so long for some of these capital sources to finally start waking up? And they have been. I remember about 15 years ago, I was working with some foundations in Baltimore, some really outstanding, good thinking foundations. And I basically said, look, you need to be a little more entrepreneurial, start investing in some of these things and get 90% back. And they were very receptive, and they were also working on these plans, but that was like 10, 15 years ago. And they're finally starting to get to this because by nature, they're very conservative or limited, whatever the case may be. We got to break through that. And again, we're not talking about asking people to invest in things that are just going to be, burnt down and wasted in 10 years. No, these are well thought out things. that can be duplicated, replicated again, based on each community's very specific dynamics and parameters.
One of the keys I think that is going to help us in putting together a new funding model to assist in community revitalization is crowdfunding. And I'm going to say that with a couple reservations, which I'll get into in a moment. But back in the Great Recession, when the federal government and a lot of state governments suddenly realized they needed more job generation and they were completely dependent upon small businesses to create these jobs, they told the small businesses and entrepreneurs, get to work, create those jobs. And the response was, we have no capital, similar to the situation we're dealing with communities. So in 2012, they passed the Jobs Act, which totally uh, did a makeover on all the securities laws and regulations that had been in existence since the 1930s, which tended to totally bias and limit participation in risk investment to wealthy individuals.
Mhm.
And they realized that over time, this had cut out 97% of everybody everywhere in the United States.
Mhm.
That only 3 people out of 100 would meet these requirements and be able to engage in investment without all these expensive, burdensome, bureaucratic, crap that had been come together. And they said, now we're going to let everybody invest. Now, that isn't to say that when they made the change, they did it perfectly, and we still are learning from all this. But now, through crowdfunding, both Reg CF, Reg A plus type of offers, anyone can invest. And if the person who's packaging up the capital campaign lowers the dollar amount to a small dollar amount where somebody could put in $100 or more, then we've opened it up where everybody really has a legitimate chance to invest. And this changes so radically the concept of community investment because in the local community, the people who are going to benefit most are the people who live there. And yet,
Mhm.
prior to the Jobs Act, they had essentially no capability whatsoever of investing in their own community. They're barred by laws and regulations. But here's my reservation on that, and to some of the point that Steve made earlier. One, hardly anybody still knows today about the crowdfunding laws and what it can do. It's still in its infancy. It's still being tested. It's still being figured out. And one of the problems I've seen, and the one I will say I've voiced complaints about, is that after we passed this law to allow Joe and Sally, everybody to invest in small dollar amounts,
Mhm.
almost all the offers that came forward were hyped as high rate of return uh, type of offerings that were targeted to wealthy people and ignored the average person on the street.
Mhm.
And this has led to a lack of interest because there's there's all kinds of mechanical challenges of getting a wealthy person to make a small dollar investment. It doesn't make sense to them. It doesn't make sense to the project.
Mhm.
So in recent years, the word impact investing has come into play. And these are people who understand that they may not get a high rate of return, but they can do social good and they want to do social good. And crowdfunding may be the best vehicle for them to use to get from their goals to making something happen. So I think now that between this recognition that crowdfunding can um, be the tool that makes social change happen and a growing awareness of more people that crowdfunding actually exists,
Mhm.
we have the chance to, in effect, turn the corner with relatively new tools in the toolbox that weren't there prior to the Jobs Act passage, which actually wasn't enacted until not enacted but regulated until 2016. So we're just 8 years into something that is so transformative. It has all the potential in the world, but it's only if the tool is used correctly in the right place at the right time.
Exactly. And to the credit of the pioneers and the activists that have been helping create this mechanism, there is a lot of work to help try to amend or address some of the issues of crowdfunding. It's a little too cumbersome, a few other things. So that it's going to take a little while to work out, and that's fine with me. In the meantime, the question is, how can we take this concept, which again should be a really great, powerful tool, particularly in local communities, and really tap into that while all these other parts are being kind of remedied or improved. And my perspective again is, are there other ways to go out there and highlight that crowdfunding is an option? Again, it's a pretty quiet secret. Not a lot of people know about this. You go to your financial advisor, I really doubt they're going to say, hey, there's a concept out here. Take a grant from your mutual fund that's supporting things you may not like and put it into the coffee shop in your neighborhood that you will definitely benefit from, or whatever the case may be. So to me, with my organizing kind of angle here, again, I can't think sing with one dimension. The question is there an audience out there that needs to be informed about this, that actually has some resources? So one of the ways that, I'd like to concentrate on is, how do we inform those activists out there? And again, with my grassroots activism, we have the ability to reach out to literally millions of people. Hey, take the survey, tell us what you think, send a donation to your offer. So there's these mechanisms out there that can really reach out to millions of what I call activists who need to turn into investors. So to me, if can we partner with the grassroots organizations or other activists, social justice organizations, environmental organizations, tap into those millions of people and say, hey, look, you may not be aware of this, but here's a tool. Check this out. We're asking you to make an investment, not a donation, and then explain to them what crowdfunding is. I would say that once we can wake up that sleeping giant, then it starts gaining momentum. And again, crowdfunding would be the fuel to help attract other more conventional and larger stacks of capital. So all these things really have to be mobilized and deployed to give us an even break in the communities that we're trying to compete against market forces. Level the playing field.
So I agree with you. I think that there's so many people out there who are unhappy with the way things are, who would like to be engaged themselves to bring value to projects by revitalizing communities, underserved, economically distressed communities. And if they are provided the proper vehicle, that they'll get in and drive it, to all these different locations, make stuff happen. And then as we talk about capital stacks, there are other existing sources of capital, which I will say are pointed not necessarily in the wrong direction, but they're not achieving the maximum outcome that they would like to. So if you talk about a donor advised fund, this is a vehicle that was created where people can make a charitable contribution into a fund and receive a deduction on their taxes. And then they can indicate or influence where they'd like the fund to spend that particular money. And right now, most of that money is going into nonprofits who are doing their own thing, but there are opportunities where that money could go into a private business or a community project and not only do good, but roll that money over as it generates a profit. This becomes an evergreen or revolving loan fund. And so the money is not used once and gone, but it is used over and over and over again. So you have a multiplier effect just by doing it in that fashion. Similarly, nonprofits, but in particular foundations, they often will put their money directly into nonprofits who are the more active arm of what the foundations do with their money. but they are permitted by law and actually encouraged by IRS rulings to make investments in businesses who are doing the mission of that foundation. That's called a program related investment, or PRI. And this is something that, again, the word is getting out, however slowly. But if you take the money from foundations and donor advised funds and you match that with crowdfunding money, now we're starting to get some serious aggregation of capital in capital stacks,
Mhm.
where you can go into a community with a large enough money, not to put another teeter totter in the park, but actually to take down a number of square blocks and rebuild those to net zero for affordable housing, for community stuff, and make some significant changes and improvements in those communities. And so um, we're watching it happen. We're trying to push, nurture, encourage everything forward to make this happen. And Steve and I are working with some other people to try to create better investment vehicles that we think will be more efficient and more effective to coalesce or collect funding for individual communities. So it's an evolving work task, hopefully not too Herculean in size and scope, but there are moments where you're sure that the wind's blowing the wrong direction every time you step into it.
That sounds like someone who's got a lot of experience.
Yeah, yeah. The number of times we've stepped into a project that felt good, was the right thing to do, and gotten our head smashed in, for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't like you did anything wrong, but you had a government agency that wasn't paying attention, or another agency working in conflict with the other government agency, or a nonprofit who was so proud of itself that it couldn't find a way to work with anybody else. Or you've got people who think that nonprofits should never make any money, that it has to be all from the heart, and economically sustainable translated into profits is evil and should be avoided at all costs. We could go on with this long list of obstacles and challenges to what we're talking about.
That's for the next hour or two or three.
Two or three.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, I think that the opportunity is there. I think we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's obviously a lot of work to put together and prove and demonstrate to people that we can revitalize communities in a way that generates a profit without gentrification, that builds wealth amongst the local members, and that requires going back to some basics in economic development. What are critical core components of a community? You can't get a mother to take a job if she has to put her kid, she has to take care of the kids. So you need daycare, you need a grocery store, you need food coming in. It may not look like a grocery store. The future may look like something different. Steve, I know you particularly emphasize the arts as a way of being a sense of community, and taking pride in and working with community. These are all things that, as we're doing our I'll call it, we're using the drawing board right now. We're going, what's the basic core that is the seed we would plant in a community that will grow with the right capital.
Well, arts is something that I absolutely just stumbled into as a real community builder, and after a while, I realized it's not only a community builder, but it's the mortar that really helps tie things together. So in my community, just on the edge of Washington D.C., was kind of always underdeveloped area. We had, plenty of our crack issues because we were on the border of DC, and all these other things. And I helped start an arts organization that, much to my surprise, evolved into a huge community anchor that created so much economic activity, interest, political intention, a sense of community, and a bunch of other things. And more importantly, it was a very low cost of capital to get going. And then after helping this grow and become an impresario, which I didn't know what that word was, but by default, when I helped put this together, I also became a funder of this. But what really happened made me realize, and our community is, even though we're a pretty progressive, artsy kind of community and very integrated for a typical American community outside of the city, it was a way to really bring all people together. People, when it comes to arts, come together. Music, dance, all sorts of things. Very international kind of organization. My whole point here is that, again, through evolution, what made me realize it's not all about capital. It's not all about finding the greatest real estate deal. It's about tying all these things together, including that local business that will hold on to an employee a little bit longer than, let's say, the big box, because they invested in that employee, they're a resident, a neighbor, things like that. You have to take all these things together, and that's when people start volunteering to go into the schools that now lack art and a whole bunch of other things that you and I had as a kid. So all of a sudden now you have stronger community fabric that then started to become a little more assertive in their choosing their own leaders. So that's what really helped build a stronger community. And every community that I got involved with in terms of real estate investment and creating housing, I try to bring all these pieces together. Partly because, one, it makes sense, it's efficient, there's an economy of scale, and secondly, I'm a capitalist. I want to lower my risk. So if I'm going to help improve my communities in a socially just way, which again, after 35 years, I could document that when I say people before profit, I can show that. Not all developers can show that, no matter how well-meaning you are. So you take all this and say, look, there's other ways to do this and still get investors their returns and all these other things. Why can't we do it this way? It's not radical. As a matter of fact, it's really conventional capitalism, just done in a slightly different way, of which capital, being a little more adroit and available, is really the key that unlocks a lot of this and would transform our society over the next generation and create many more local jobs and other things. And again, a sense of community, lowers crime, sense of belonging, a whole bunch of lower mental health. When you have all this, there's just so much, so many benefits to kind of changing the way we rebuild communities. And that's really important. Again, it's all based on proper access to capital.
Yeah, so I think that, a topic that's been on a lot of programs I've been involved with in private conversations is that globally as a society, we've tended or trended towards transactional relationships where hi, goodbye, and that's the end of it. Whereas as we start focusing more on relationships and on the mutual support of people within our relationships, we will find that certain things like the arts are a high return on investment, not in terms of direct capital or money in my account this week, but it's a high return in the sense that indirect, you are, as you described it, you're creating all this integration, all this sense of purpose, common community. And these all enhance the richness of your lifestyle. This is what economic development, at the end of the day, just says, I want a richer, better life. Well, money certainly will contribute to that. But I saw some studies last week where money is extraordinarily helpful when you have none, but at some point, money doesn't buy happiness. Other things buy happiness. And instead of waiting until we're rich to explore the possibility of being happy, we can start at ground zero and say, let's build happiness into the community. And I think the arts is an interesting, if not the best component for that, because um, everybody seems to feel that they can participate in, maybe have a right to the arts, to music, and anything else that goes on. Where some of the other activities in a community, I think sometimes take on this edge of well, that's for the rich people, or that's for somebody else, and I don't get to participate in that. And they feel shut out. They feel they don't have a right to participate in that, and it contributes to this failure of the community to work together. So
Mhm.
I see banging a drum as a common element where whether they're playing with trash can lids or they're making something up on the fly or they have the latest and greatest drum kit. Everybody kind of relates to that. And if that's done with a sense of, look what we did here, you're all invited, we all play together,
Yeah.
then we can look at some of these other activities, which I think people feel left out of, and we can work on those as well.
Well, not only that, and just a quick little aside here in terms of the arts. One of the things I accidentally discovered in my involvement with the arts, again, I was a typical American arts, dance. Yeah, okay, that's what you do when you go to the Kennedy Center. I accidentally got into this, endeavor, and a dance studio evolved from that. So I thought, okay, it's a little bit of activity on our pretty, uh, you know, um, uh, ragged main street here, so we get some activity here. But what happened was we began to realize, and part of the deal was when I put this together with two dancers, I said, "Look, here's what I envision: this, that, and the other. And by the way, I want you to do as much for children." And what happened was, because children, by the way, are our greatest assets, we really need to cultivate. What happened was, again, we were in a border town where the kids on our streets were pretty savvy. The wise ones that are 7 or 9, you knew by the time they're 11, they're going to be runners, and then by the time they're 14, they were going to be juvenile at detention, and then at 18, they're either an entrepreneur or a guest of the U.S. Government. All this kind of stuff. We saw this within our kids in our neighborhood, and that was really surprising was the kids, especially the boys, got engaged and they started participating and they got involved with gymnastics and things like that. In other words, they started finding talents with themselves. You could just see their self confidence and sense of self just change. So now, fast forward many years later, these kids who we knew were destined for entrepreneurial, masters and the wrong side of the street are all, amazing how many of these children turned out well. The point being is we invest in these children. They discover things that they never saw in themselves because the schools don't do this. We impacted lives and an entire generation of kids who now are not, a burden for society, but are truly, really much, much better community citizens, many of who stayed in this community because they have a sense of identity with our dance studio that does much more than dance. So that's kind of, again, it's more than just build bricks and mortars and businesses. It's really creating this sense of community, including churches who have kind of abandoned their buildings, moved out to the suburbs, now need to come back to their communities, take their parking lots, their extra land, revive their church, and build housing, a whole bunch of other things, and become a campus for, again, community connection, like they used to be. Maybe before even our generation, they're a real pillar in the community. Not that they aren't now, but anyway, all these things come together that ultimately mitigate the risk of our investments in these communities. See,
Well,
I'm still a capitalist, even though I would really like to have much more of a social justice outcomes for all. It can happen.
yeah, so it's interesting. If everyone were in agreement that children are our greatest asset, then we would also agree that our best investment is a long-term patient capital investment.
Yes.
It's not short-term, it's not day trading, it's not in and out for the buck today and back tomorrow. We're talking about 10, 20 years down the road to take a child to the point of being a member of our community and being placed in a position where they can give back to our community, and investments required along the path. So as we're talking about revitalizing communities, we know that one of the elements is this long term investment that will be mixed and matched with other shorter term investments so that we can match up with different types of investors. And that's what a capital stack is all about. So that brings us to the end of our time here today, Steve. talking about community engagement. And any last thoughts that you'd like to share, summarize in less than 5 million words?
Well, that might be tough for me. The bottom line here is we all come together, work together, improve on the apparatus we have. We could do so much, much more impact in our communities without necessarily sacrificing too much on a financial return. It can be done. It's not radical brain surgery. It can be done. It's just a matter of will and putting the right mechanics together, which I think are coming together as we speak.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate your being a guest on the show today. A lot of the things that Steve and I are talking about, I'm going to be featuring within my daily edition and weekly edition of my newsletter, Instant Funding. And so you'll be able to watch the progression as we work on this particular project and dive deep into it over time. And in this case, you probably need to be patient as this unfolds because it's not going to happen overnight. But thank you, Steve, and thank you, audience, for being with us today.
Thank you, Carl. Appreciate it.